huge rocks in the field. It was a particularly warm and muggy Texas night and I, drenched, collapsed to the ground and suddenly start to cry. My sadness turns to a flash of anger and I start to beat the shit out of the thing's corpse with the butt of the rifle and yelling. I would have definitely seemed crazy had anyone been out there to see it, now somewhat muddy and screaming and jamming life's melee button on a dead animal. Suddenly feel impelled to look to my right, and there on the ground just 2 or 3 feet away I see a small mouse toy. I picked it up and found it was the kind that makes the little chirping sound when you shake or throw it. Despite being on the damp ground in the middle of the field, it looks brand new and is brightly colored. Strange that I missed it before. Holding it I felt very calm and the air now seemed pleasantly cool. I take back one of the smaller stones from that spot, along with the toy. I bury the toy in the backyard with the stone as a marker, with her name on it. Sometimes when I visit my parents and sleep in my old room, as I'm just about to fall asleep I can hear a faint purring sound. I've never really had any paranormal encounters unless this counts. I've always felt that she gave that to me to help put me at ease, just as she would when I'd have nightmares. I strongly felt back in that moment finding it that she didn't want me to be angry and out uselessly seeking vengeance. It's hard to word correctly, but it was like a direct emotional conveyance or something, a feeling I don't think I would have reached alone. This happened back when I was in high school. Moved to new city for dad's new job. Move into older 2-story home. Everything's fine for a couple of weeks. House seems pretty normal. One summer night I was laying in my room and felt this really odd feeling, like something bad was about to happen. I sat there for a while and tried to ignore it and go to sleep. Hear weird groaning sound. Sounds like screaming almost. Gets louder to the point where it starts to hurt my ears. Sound like multiple people screaming frantically. It stops, nothing but silence and laying in a pitch black room. I hear someone coming down the hall and my mom opens the door to ask if I was playing any music or video games, because the screaming woke her and my dad up. It woke up my little brother too. I said I didn't and had no idea what it was or where it came from, sounded like from everywhere if that makes sense. I freaked us all out and after a couple of days my mom asked my neighbors what was the history of the house. It was built in the 50s but a fire killed a family that was living in it. The house wasn't too damaged and was rebuilt. Here's the fucked up part. About 1 year afterwards, I fell asleep and was woke up at 3 o'clock by a weird sounding laugh. I looked around in the dark to see what looked like a silhouette of a woman. The image gets clearer and it looks like a woman in charred 1950s clothing. Nope. I see her face and it looks burned and skull-like, while the other half was almost fine. She screamed and flew at me. I freaked out and ran from my room. My parents woke up and had heard the scream also. We moved out and into a cheap apartment while we were selling the house. We eventually moved out and have a new place. We sold it to some young couple out of Boston. They've had no issues apparently. From an outdoor hunting website that had a creepy experiences thread. On the trip in question I decided to hike the Old Malala Indian Trail that followed the ridge tops from Saddle Blanket Mountain to Oak Ridge, one of the Native Americans' favorite summer camps and trading centers. It was a beautiful August day, 2 days into the hike. I expected to be gone about 2 weeks, when literally out of the blue the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me in my life occurred. It would change my perspective of reality forever. I was walking along the trail enjoying the strong breeze and bright sunshine when, in the middle of a step, everything around me started to turn gray and blurry. The only way I can describe it was as if suddenly I was looking through someone else's prescription sunglasses. I finished the step and started another. Every inch I moved forward, the darkness increased and the gray blurring turned into a jumble of shapes that made no sense. I then seemed to pass a barrier and everything started to return back into focus. When my foot reached the ground on the second step, everything around me had changed. Day had turned into night and there was no wind. All the Douglas fir and pine trees had been replaced with thick jungle-like growth. The cool thin mountain air was replaced with humid thick air. There were no stars in the sky, but there was a diffused light that let me see everything clearly. However, I couldn't tell what the light source was. As often happens when the human body receives a massive dose of adrenaline, the entire incident appeared like it was in slow motion, and even though I was only there for a second or two, I had time to observe my surroundings. The silence was broken by continuous high-pitched keening sound, and I was nearly overwhelmed. My momentum caused me to take one more step before stopping in my tracks. It was at this point I heard a whispered "gotcha" over my right shoulder. I couldn't tell if I heard it with my ears or inside my head. The word wasn't directed at me, but something said the word quietly to itself. I was so terrified I actually felt my heart stop for a moment. That whispered word is what saved me. I opened my mouth and gasped in a huge gush of thick air and recoiled backward in the same footsteps I had entered wherever I was. As I threw myself backward, I looked over my right shoulder. A dark-colored hairy right hand and arm was reaching for my throat over my shoulder. The hand had pale ivory spade-shaped fingernails. The nails looked clean and almost had a manicured look to them. The thumb was placed lower, towards the wrist, on the hand than a human's is. Both hand and arm were thin and powerful looking, and both were covered with thick coarse black hair. I got a good look at it because the thumbnail grazed my neck. It did not break the skin, as I moved backwards. As I continued backwards, the hand clutched where my neck had been a split second before, and it seemed to fade off into the distance as I returned through the portal. I took 2 more steps backwards and everything reversed itself from what had just happened. The world around me became lighter, the fir and pines gradually came back into view, and by the 3rd step I was back on Saddle Blanket Mountain. I continued to move backwards in terror, and as I did, I observed that where I had just come from was a shimmering oval patch of air about the size of a large door. The woods behind it looked like it was underwater. By the 5th backward step, the shimmering area seemed to just evaporate and everything was back to normal. By then my lungs had nearly burst from the volume of air I had inhaled during the huge gasp I had just taken. My body felt like it was on fire from the adrenaline surge. I spun around and ran back down the trail as fast as my legs could carry me, and didn't stop until I reached my truck. I was nearly 2 days getting to that place and about 3 hours getting back. On my way home I was absolutely horrified at the thought of what would happen if I were to drive my truck into something like that. It had been a trap, pure and simple. Whatever it was that tried to kill me somehow kept the portal hidden from me on the way in, and I didn't actually see it until I was back out again. I had terrible nightmares for years, and still haven't come to grips with what happened. My fingers are trembling and the hair is standing up on the nape of my neck as I write this. Severely shaken, I've read everything I could get my hands on about people who have mysteriously disappeared throughout history, and discovered several instances where people have vanished in plain sight of others. The quantum physics people have a theory about parallel universes. They just might be right. Since I originally wrote this, report number 9202 from Sutter County, California was submitted to the BFRO. The person who submitted the report drew a picture of a creature he saw in a tree. The right hand in the picture is exactly the same as the one I saw. Note the thumb placement, and the forearm of the left arm is exactly like the forearm of the creature that attacked me. Anyway, you could post the pic from that thread? Very cool story though. Really lines up with my own theories. There was no picture. The thread was over 100 pages long, but it was an older forum style that didn't have support for pics. Here is the thread. Damn good read. Here's the pic the passage refers to. It's hosted on a different website, not on that actual thread. FD fag here. Former hotshot. In a woods typo guy. Side note from Wiki. In the United States, an interagency hotshot crew, IHC, or simply hotshot crew, is an elite hand crew consisting of 20 to 22 wildland firefighters, with specific qualifications to take on leadership roles while providing extended attack on large fires across the nation. They meet and exceed the requirements of Type 1 firefighters in terms of their extensive training, high physical fitness standards, and ability to undertake difficult, dangerous, and stressful assignments. They often respond to large, high-priority fires and are trained and equipped to work in remote areas for extended periods of time with little logistical support. Interagency hotshot crews are the most highly trained, skilled, and experienced type of hand crews. 2009 summer. Out on exercise with our team. Fucking middle of nowhere, AK. It's ass. Doing standard hotshot junk and prepping for forest fires. I'm a human Smokey the Bear. Speaking of bears, goddamn there are a lot of bears. We've seen bears before, we're not even really worried about them anymore. Honestly, the bears might think we're one of them at this point. Standard safety precautions are taken, we think little of it since most of us are pretty seasoned. Nighttime comes on day 3, and we can hear bears, somewhere out there, fighting. This isn't unusual, and it doesn't rightly bother us. But then something does. The cries of an injured bear fill the air in the wee hours of the morning, followed by a piercing howl. Not a wolf. Not a deer. Not a moose. No find of gentleman to be shaken by the prospect of a cryptid in a woods, and also because we all, in the back of our minds I'm sure, assumed it was a moose, handed out, and foreman makes mention to the bears. If there's an injured bear out there we need to be careful, because that means there's an even larger bear, or highly aggressive bull moose out here too, and we do not want to fight that. The day goes as normal, wood cutting, trail marking, prep, so on and so forth. We hear the occasional howl from the bear which we know is somewhere in the area, but not anywhere we can determine. Lunch mess comes around and a crew of 4 doesn't return with no radio contact. Assignment was to head to a nearby river tributary and collect water.